Have you ever stopped to think about what the true legacy a father leaves to his son is? I'm not talking about money, houses, or property. I'm talking about that which cannot be stolen or lost, that which shapes the mind, destiny, and worldview. That was the question the 93-year-old millionaire asked me that morning, and before I could answer, he said something I'll never forget. If parents only feed the body, the children inherit the hunger. But when children nurture the spirit, they inherit the world. He asked me to bring my son with me. He said he didn't want to teach me anything more. Now it was time to teach to him. The old man's tone of voice was different, calmer, slower, but with the firmness of someone about to share what he has learned in a lifetime. The room where he received us was simple, but everything there seemed to have a purpose. On the table, there was only a lit candle and an old book open in the middle. He ran his hand over the pages and said, "Everything I've achieved began when I realized that money is a servant and ignorance a cruel master." For a moment, silence reigned. The wind rustled against the window, and the morning light illuminated his tired face, a face that had seen both scarcity and abundance. He looked at my son and asked, "How old is he?" "Ours," responded. 11 is the right age to learn the hardest law of all. That wealth doesn't come from what you earn, but from what you understand. The boy remained silent, trying to understand those words, and the old man continued. Parents today teach their children how to win, but they forget to teach them how to understand what winning means. And that's why they create adults who are rich in money, but poor in meaning. Those words struck me like an ancient truth that I had always known, but had never heard aloud. He looked at me and said, "You think you want a successful son, David, but what you really want is a free child, and no one is free while they are a slave to fear or desire." I paused for a moment. The old man watched me with steady, unblinking eyes. The candle flame flickered and he said, "Teaching a child how to get rich is easy. The hard part is teaching them how to deserve it." He stood up with difficulty, leaning on a cane. He walked to the window and pointed outside. "Look at the world, David. It's full of tired parents and confused children. Parents who teach how to survive, but not how to think. Parents who talk about success, but never about purpose." My son watched everything in silence. The old man turned to him and asked, "Do you know what wealth is?" The boy shook his head shyly, and the old man replied, "True wealth is when what you have cannot be taken away from you." That kept echoing in my head. For a moment, I felt a lump in my throat. How many times have I myself confused comfort with wisdom? How many times have I wanted to give my son everything, but never considered whether I was teaching him enough to know what to do with it all? The old man noticed my silence and smiled, as if he could read my thoughts. "Don't blame yourself. Most men want to be heroes, but the real hero is the father who prepares his son to live without him." He came closer and placed his hand on my son's shoulder. "When I was his age," he said, "my father taught me how to make money, but he never taught me to understand its value. And I needed to lose everything to understand that money is merely a reflection of the mind of the person who possesses it." He looked at me and added, "That's why you need to teach your child to think. Don't repeat it. Don't want it. Think about it." His voice trembled slightly, but his gaze was unwaveringly firm. It was as if each word carried decades of experience, scars and regrets. "Parents teach their children to conquer the world," he said, "but they forget to teach them to conquer themselves." A heavy silence filled the room. The boy breathed deeply, listening attentively to every word, as if he understood that this moment would never be repeated. And the old man concluded, "If you want him to never be poor, David, teach him to recognize value before price. Teach him to understand before he possesses, and teach him to say thank you before asking." The three of us stood there, quiet, for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. The old man picked up the book from the table, closed it carefully, and said, "Everything you need to teach your child is contained in 7 lessons. But before you learn the first one, you need to understand the mistake I made." The candlelight slowly faded, as if time had stopped. He stared at me and whispered, "It was the mistake that cost me 30 years of poverty, David, and the same mistake that almost made my son inherit what I fought my whole life to forget." The old man looked me in the eyes and said, "David, the first mistake parents make is thinking that their children learn from what they hear. But what truly shapes a child is what he sees every day." He stood up slowly, went to an old bookcase and picked up a photograph. It was a yellowed image, almost erased by time. In it, he, still young, held a hammer and smiled. "I was 28 years old when I took this photo," he said. "And I smiled, even without knowing that life was about to teach me the value of silence." He walked to the window, looked out and continued, "Back then, I would wake up complaining about work, lack of money, and lack of time. But I didn't realize that my son was watching me every day. I used to tell him that the world was unfair, and he grew up believing it. At age 10, he was already repeating my complaints. At 20, I kept repeating my fears. And at 30, I was living in the same poverty that I claimed to hate so much." The old man paused, took a deep breath and turned slowly. "David, that's how I realized that a father doesn't educate with words alone. He educates through his tone of voice, his gaze, and the way he deals with his own life." He sat down again and said, "One day when I lost everything, I found my son crying, and he asked me, 'Dad, what are we going to do now?' And I, angry at fate, replied, 'Nothing, son. That's life. Some are born to win, others to try.'" The old man clenched his fist. It was at that moment that I realized I had broken something in it. I taught him to give up before even trying, and the worst part is that he believed me. He ran his hand over his face and continued in a low voice, "David, children believe everything their parents say, even when the parents don't believe in anything, and what they believe becomes who they will be." For a moment, the room was silent. The wind was swaying the curtains, and I could hear the distant sound of a bell. My son watched intently without blinking. The old man leaned forward and said, "When a father speaks negatively about his own work, the son grows up thinking that work is a punishment. When a father speaks negatively about money, the son grows up believing that prospering is a sin. And when a father complains about life, the son grows up thinking that living is a burden." He rested his hands on his knee and added, "Do you want to know the first secret to ensuring your child never becomes poor? Teach him to admire, not to complain." Then she smiled and added, "When a father speaks of gratitude, his son learns about abundance. But when the father speaks of lack, the son inherits the scarcity." He told a simple but powerful story. "Many years ago, I met a man named Eli. He was a bricklayer. He lived in a small house with 3 children and a sick wife. Every morning before leaving for work, he would place his hands over his heart and say, 'Thank you, God, for another day of life.' The neighbors laughed at him. They said he was foolish, that he was grateful even though he had nothing. But his children grew up with a different perspective. One became an engineer, another a teacher, and the youngest started a company. None of them got rich by accident. They grew up believing that hard work was a blessing, not a punishment, because they learned to see value where others only saw pain." The old man turned to me and said, "That's what I mean by example. Children don't learn from what you want to teach them. They learn from what you repeat every day." His words were simple, but they seemed to carry centuries of truth. I looked at my son and thought about how many times he had heard me complain. Bills, traffic, tiredness, people. How many times has he seen me looking at my phone instead of looking at him? And how many times, without realizing it, did I teach him the same haste that was distancing me from life? The old man noticed my gaze and said calmly, "It's not too late. It's never too late to change the example. A sincere gesture is worth more than 1,000 heartless pieces of advice." He said that after losing everything, he started waking up before sunrise. He would go to the window, take a deep breath, and say, "Thank you." The neighbors thought he was crazy, but his son, who had been watching him silently, began to do the same. And that's how he learned the power of example, without words, without plans, just by living consciously. "One day," the old man continued, "my son told me, 'Dad, I see you waking up every day and giving thanks. May I know why?' And I replied, 'Because I've learned that those who are grateful can transform even a little into a lot.'" He smiled and never asked again. The old man looked at my son and said, David, if one day you want to teach your son something, don't tell him what he should be. Show who you choose to be every day." He leaned back in his chair, tired, and murmured, "Children don't follow what their parents say. They follow what their parents believe." That phrase remained etched in my memory like a luminous scar. He was right. Poverty doesn't begin with a lack of money, but with a lack of living examples. The old man smiled, closed his eyes for a moment, and said softly, "But there is something even more dangerous than setting a bad example, David. Something that destroys a child's future before they even grow up." She opened her eyes and added in a firm voice, "It's fear. The fear that parents experience without realizing it." He stood up slowly, pointed at me and said, "And that's what we need to talk about now." The old man took a deep breath and said, "Fear, David, is the worst teacher a father can give." That phrase lingered in the air as if it carried weight. He placed his hands on the table and stared intently at me. "You can give love, advice, even an inheritance, but if you give fear, you will take away your child's right to dream." He paused for a long time. "Fear is discreet, you know. It doesn't shout. It whispers, and children learn it in silence." The old man recounted that when he was young, his father used to repeat, "Beware of failure. Work hard, but don't take risks. The world is cruel." And he grew up believing that. At 30 years old, he was still asking for permission to live. He had ideas, but he shelved them. He had dreams, but he postponed them. I wasn't poor because of a lack of opportunities, David. I was poor because of an excess of fear. Why are so many people trapped in a life they don't love? He himself answered, "Because someone taught them to be afraid to try." Fear is hereditary, he said. It's passed down from father to son through innocent phrases. "It's not going to work. This isn't for us. It's best not to take the risk." And each of these phrases transforms into an invisible wall within a child's mind. "Do you want to know what fear does?" he asked. He teaches his son to be cautious when he should be curious. Teach your son to obey when you should be raising him. The old man leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms and said, "David, there are parents who say they want to protect their child, but what they do is plant fear within them. Too much protection is also imprisonment." He was silent for a few seconds, then told a story. "When my son was little, he wanted to open a lemonade stand in front of our house. I laughed. I said it wasn't worth it, that people wouldn't buy it. He insisted, but I dashed his dream with a no. Years later, I realized that that no didn't stop a lemonade stand. It prevented a future entrepreneur. How many times do we do the same thing? How many times in trying to protect do we end up limiting those we love?" The old man looked at me and answered without me asking, "Fear is disguised as caution, and that's why it destroys without making a sound." He said he spent half his life trying to please others, and the other half trying to understand why he never felt free. That's when I realized that fear is like an invisible tax. It exacts a heavy price from those who don't confront it. His hands were trembling, but his voice was firm. "I've seen brilliant men die in jobs they hated. I've seen incredibly talented women give up on themselves for fear of making mistakes. And I saw parents teaching their children to conform, calling it prudence." "Why is fear so compelling?" he replied with a slight smile. "Because he uses the voice of those we love. It's the father saying, 'Be careful.' It's the mother saying, 'Don't go too far.' And the son, without realizing it, begins to confuse security with stagnation." He walked to the window and pointed towards the horizon. "David, fear disguises itself as logic. He always has good arguments, but it's nothing more than a lie told with polite words." Then he turned to me and said, "Do you want your child to never be poor? Teach him not to fear making mistakes. Teach him to see mistakes as part of the journey, not as proof of failure." The old man took a small notebook from his pocket and opened it to a yellowed page. There, it was written in trembling handwriting, "Fear steals before the thief arrives." He pointed to the sentence and said, "That was a lesson I learned too late. For years I didn't live. I just avoided suffering. But those who avoid suffering avoid growing." Have you ever noticed that fear never truly disappears? It just changes form. When we are young, we are afraid to try. When we become adults, we are afraid of change. And when we get older, we're afraid to realize that we haven't truly lived. He approached my son and asked, "What scares you the most, kid?" The boy thought for a moment and replied, "To disappoint." The old man smiled sadly. "That's exactly what destroyed my generation, David. We weren't living to be happy. I lived to avoid disappointing anyone." The silence in the room was heavy, but not sad. It seemed as if the old man was speaking not only to me, but to all the parents in the world. "David, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to act even when trembling. And that's the lesson you need to pass on." He bent down, looked at the boy and said calmly, "You can make mistakes, fall, get lost. But if you have the courage to try again, you will never be poor. Because the courageous man always has a future." Then he straightened up and concluded, "But remember, courage without direction is just impulse. And that is why the next lesson is the one that truly transforms a man." The old man took a deep breath before continuing. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, casting golden shadows on the floor. He looked at my son and said, "Now you will understand the true meaning of work. Because the world talks about working, but almost no one understands what it means." He paused and added, "David, most people don't work. They just get tired. Working is something completely different. Working is serving something greater than one's own ego." We remained silent. The old man stood up carefully and went to a wooden box on the table. From inside, he took out a small hammer and held it as if it were a symbol. "This hammer has fed me for 20 years, and it wasn't what gave me money, it was what taught me purpose." He recounted that he started as a carpenter's apprentice at age 16. He spent the entire day sanding wood, cutting planks and cleaning floors. I thought it was humiliating until the day the master told me, "I'm not teaching you how to cut wood, I'm teaching you how to hone patience." He looked at the boy and said, "People think that work is the price you pay to have something, but work is the process that transforms you into who you are." Over the past 20 years, studies have shown that over 70% of people worldwide say they hate their jobs. The old man knew this fact, but not from numbers. He saw it in people's faces. They wake up every day to sustain a body, but forget to feed their soul. They work out of fear of falling, not out of love for what they build. Then, he shared something no one expected. He said that during an economic crisis, he lost everything. "I was left with debts, shame, and anger. But in the midst of the chaos, I started repairing old furniture to survive. That's when I realized that work, when done with intention, heals the spirit. I used to fix broken chairs as if I were rebuilding my own life," the old man said, his eyes welling up with tears. "And every time I returned a chair to someone, I felt I was also returning a little bit of hope." "Why is it that work destroys some and liberates others?" He replied, "Because those who work only out of necessity never find rest, but those who work with purpose find meaning even in pain." The old man sat down again and spoke calmly. "Teach your son to serve with joy. Teach him to find beauty even in simple tasks, because when the heart is right, even the smallest job becomes great." He took a piece of paper and wrote a short sentence. "Money follows those who serve with excellence." And he explained, "This isn't just philosophy, it's an invisible law. The greatest entrepreneurs, the artists, the wise men, they all understood this. They serve first. Winning is just a consequence." The old man told a story about a baker in a small village. He made the simplest bread, but with such care that people came from far and wide just to buy it. When they asked him what his secret was, he said, "I bake bread as if God were my first customer." He smiled and said, "This is the real work, a ritual, a daily offering." How many people do you know who constantly complain about Mondays? How many long for the weekend as if work were a prison? "These people," said the old man, "are rich in hours and poor in purpose. They sell time, but forget to live the time they have." He paused for a long time, looked at the boy and continued, "David, school teaches your son to pass tests, but not to love the process. The world teaches him to produce, not to be proud of what he produces. Therefore, teach him to work as one prays." He stood up, went to the window, and pointed to the horizon. "The sun rises at the same time every day, David. It has never failed. It never tires of fulfilling its role. That's what work is, fulfilling your role consistently even when no one is watching. Then he turned to me and said something that seemed simple but sounded like a revelation. Work that springs from the soul never exhausts the body. For a moment, no one said anything. The sound of the wind mingled with the distant noise of the street. "It took me 50 years to understand," he said, "and I only learned when I stopped working for money and started working for love." He cited a statistic that made me think. "You know, David, in a recent study they discovered that the happiest people in the world aren't those who earn the most, but those who feel that what they do has meaning. That's wealth." He looked at the boy and said in a firm voice, "Teach him to love what he does, and money will follow. Teach him to do what he hates with gratitude, and money will come as a master." Why does society value success so much and effort so little? The old man answered before I could ask, "Because it's easier to applaud the result than to understand the process. But those who understand the process never get lost, even when the result changes." He came closer, placed his hand on my son's shoulder and said, "Work, kid, but not for what the work gives you. Work for what it makes you become." The old man sat down again, tired but serene. A man who works only to pay bills lives a tired life. The man who works with purpose rests even while he works. Then he was silent for a few seconds, looked at me and whispered, "But there is something even more powerful than work, something that can transform what you do into multiplication, and that's what most people never understand." The old man ran his hand over the book, closing it slowly. The candle flame flickered in the corner of the table. He looked at me and said, "Now, David, you need to understand something the world has forgotten. The man who only knows how to receive becomes dependent, but the man who learns to give becomes free." He stood up and walked to a small shelf. There was a metal box, rusted with age. He carefully opened it and took out a yellowed envelope. "Inside," he said, "are the notes from the most difficult period of my life." It was when I realized that generosity without conscience destroys more than it helps. The old man recounted that when he began to prosper, he started helping everyone around him. He paid off friends' debts, financed businesses that never existed, and supported people who had given up trying. In the beginning, I felt good, fair, even noble. But little by little, I realized I was teaching something wrong. People weren't learning to fish. They were just waiting for the next fish. He paused for a long time and said, "David, helping is not the same as saving. Sometimes helping means preventing the other person from growing." The old man looked at my son and added, "Teach him that true love isn't about giving everything. It's about showing the way. A son who learns the value of achievement never lives waiting for miracles." Silence filled the room. The old man walked slowly to the window and continued, "There are two kinds of poverty, that of those who have nothing and that of those who have never learned to value what they have. The second is far more dangerous." He took a deep breath and told a story that had happened many years before. In a small village, there was a rich man known for his generosity. He helped everyone, but none of those who received prospered. One day, a rabbi called him and said, "You have given coins, but you have not given purpose. Gold without wisdom is a curse disguised as a miracle." The old man smiled and said, "From that day forward, the man changed his way of helping. Instead of giving money, he began to teach the value of work, time, and patience, and in a few years, his village was transformed." He looked at me and added, "That's how I understood the power of discipline. Generosity creates opportunity, but it's discipline that sustains what has been built." The old man sat down again and spoke calmly. "The world talks about abundance, but forgets about balance. Giving everything to someone who doesn't know how to take care of it is like putting new wine into a broken jug. Teach your son to be generous, but also responsible, to share without losing himself." For a moment, the room fell silent. I could feel the weight of those words. How many times had I myself confused generosity with guilt? How many times had I given too much trying to fill a void that wasn't material, but emotional? The old man seemed to read my thoughts. "David," he said, Parents confuse love with excess. They give everything they didn't have, forgetting that what matters most is not the gift, but the example. A child who has everything but doesn't learn the value of effort will grow up purposefully poor. He paused and recounted a curious fact. You know, research shows that 70% of wealthy families lose all their assets by the third generation. It's not bad luck. It's a lack of education, because wealth without wisdom is like sand through your fingers. He looked at the boy and continued, "Teach him that money is like rain. If it falls on dry land, it is lost. But if it falls on fertile soil, it flourishes. And that fertile soil is discipline." My son listened in silence, attentive to every word. The old man smiled and said, "Discipline is the invisible wall that protects generosity. Without it, even good deeds turn to ruin." The old man explained that after many years, he understood that even the act of giving requires intention. "I used to give because I wanted to be seen as good. Today, I give because I want to be an instrument of something good." There is a huge difference between the two things. Why is it so difficult to balance giving and protecting? He replied, "Because generosity without discipline is emotion. Discipline without generosity is selfishness. The secret is to unite the two." The old man picked up the book again and read an old note. "The hand that blesses must know when to open and when to close." He explained, "Opening is giving opportunity. Closing is teaching limits. A wise father does both." The old man leaned back and looked at me with a firm gaze. "David, if you want your son to never be poor, teach him to give without expecting anything in return, but also teach him to say no when necessary. The man who knows how to give and knows how to refuse will never be a slave." He turned to the boy and said in a calm voice, "One day, someone will ask more of you than you can give. And on that day, remember, the love that gives everything is the same love that runs out. The love that guides is the love that remains." The old man closed his eyes for a moment, and I had the feeling that he was reliving old memories. "David," he said in a trembling voice, "the greatest generosity a father can offer is to teach his son to support himself with dignity. Because money given may run out, but the value learned lasts forever." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was light, as if each word had found its place. The old man took a deep breath and concluded, "But there is something that goes beyond generosity, beyond discipline, something that sustains everything a man builds and that not even time can destroy." The old man looked at me and my son with a serene expression, as if he knew he had already said everything that needed to be said. "David," he began, "everything I've taught you so far about example, courage, work, generosity, and discipline is lost if you miss the last lesson. The most important of all, gratitude." He paused for a long time. The candle flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Gratitude, David, is not a feeling, it's a choice. It's an act of awareness." For a moment he was silent, then continued, "People think that being grateful is just saying thank you. It's not. Gratitude is a way of seeing. It's seeing value where others see routine. It's realizing that the simple fact of being alive is already a treasure." He recounted that during the worst years of his life, when he slept in a cold room and ate the same stale bread for days, he discovered that there was still something to be grateful for. "I was grateful for being able to start over, and it was that gratitude that kept me going. It made me realize that poverty is only permanent when a person forgets what they still have." He looked at the boy and asked, "Do you know why most people never feel rich, even when they have everything?" My son shook his head. "Because they always focus on what's missing and forget to take care of what already exists." The old man placed his hands on the table and spoke firmly. "Teach your son to be grateful before he wants to possess. Teach him to say thank you before he asks. Those who are grateful cultivate a fertile mind, and life always returns abundance to those who recognize it." He explained that he kept a notebook where he wrote down 3 things he was grateful for every day. At first, it seemed simple. After a few weeks, he realized that his way of seeing the world had changed. "The brain learns what we repeat," he said. And if you repeat what is bad every day, your mind will become a mirror of scarcity. But if you repeat what is good, you will create a field of prosperity in everything you touch. Modern science confirms this. Studies show that people who regularly practice gratitude have higher levels of dopamine and serotonin, the feel-good hormones. They sleep better, make clearer decisions, and maintain healthier relationships. The old man didn't know these facts, but he had lived by the same principle for decades. Gratitude is the most powerful prayer, David, because it changes the chemistry of the heart before it changes the circumstances. He smiled and added, "The man who learns to be grateful, even on difficult days, never loses, because he understands that even silence is a lesson." For a moment, the room was illuminated by a golden light. The old man seemed lighter, almost translucent. "David, life is short. Everything we accumulate dissolves with time, but what we teach with love remains." He turned to my son and said, "One day, when you grow up and the world demands haste from you, remember the old man who told you, haste is the language of scarcity, but gratitude is the language of eternity." The old man leaned back and smiled. "Now go and put what you've learned into practice, because wisdom without action is just a memory." We remained silent. I could sense that this moment wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. The old man had left behind something that no money could buy, a new way of seeing life. As we walked back home, my son held my hand and said, "Dad, can I start my own gratitude journal?" I smiled and replied, "You can, and never stop." This is the practical application that my father left me and which I now share with you. For the next 7 days before going to sleep, write down 3 things you are grateful for. It doesn't matter how small they are. It could be a gesture, a person, a chance to start over. Do this for a week and notice what changes. You will begin to see the invisible, to recognize the hidden value in small things. And when you do, you will understand that wealth is merely a reflection of a grateful mind. And if you are a father, mother, or someone who cares for another human being, start teaching this habit today, not with speeches, but with action. Gratitude is contagious. A grateful heart transforms the environment, inspires others, and changes the course of an entire family. Close your eyes for a moment and think, how many times have you given thanks today? The answer to this question can reveal whether your life is growing or just passing by. The old man used to say, "The man who gives thanks before possessing already lives in abundance. The one who complains, even surrounded by gold, will continue to feel want." And now, as you listen to these words, perhaps you will realize the same thing I realized that day. True wealth has never been outside. It has always been within. If this video touched you in any way, use that as a sign. Begin your own transformation. Write down 3 things you're grateful for today, and if you'd like, share them in the comments, even anonymously. Your story could inspire someone who needs a fresh start. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. Here, each story is a reminder that wisdom still lives on, and that a simple lesson can change the course of an entire life. Because, in the end, those who learn to be grateful before they possess will never be poor.